All right, welcome back to the Well-Watered Life. This is Sarah Asdell. I'm here again with Susan Verstrate. She's going to share again with us some Christian or one Christian biography. Susan, go ahead and tell us who you're going to talk to us about.
I'm going to talk to you today about Peggy Covell and Mitsuo Fuchida. Mitsuo Fuchida wrote this book and many others. This one's called From Pearl Harbor to Calvary. Mitsuo Fuchida was the man. I don't know if it's an old movie you guys might not remember, but there's one called Tora, and it's a World War II biography about the men who flew the attack on Pearl Harbor. He was the commander of that attack on Pearl Harbor, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th in World War II. It's what really brought the United States into World War II. But to start, there's a way that the stories are going to intertwine that you're going to love. You're going to love this story. We have to go way back in time. Before World War II started, Jim and Sharma Covell were missionaries to the Philippines. They were teaching high school there, and they heard rumors of wars coming, and they didn't know for sure. So they sent all their children. They've had 3 children, including Peggy Covell. They sent them to the United States to be safe, while Jim and Sharma just kept working in the Philippines. Well, when the Philippines fell to the Japanese, or it was they went inland back into the jungle with the other missionaries, and they had a little it's called Hopevale. They named their little camp Hopevale, and they lived there for some time until they a downed pilot for the United States. They found him, helped him release, and he went to try and get back with his unit and was captured. And under intense torture, he turned over Hopevale to the Japanese. He turned over their location. And so the Japanese declared that everyone there had to be assassinated, had to be killed. And so the group met together, and they prayed together, and they sang hymns. And then one by one, the Japanese led them up the hill and beheaded them. It was just a terrible tragedy. The Jim and Sharma lost their lives at that time. Peggy found out about it. She was notified in the United States, and her bitterness was intense. You can only imagine. The whole United States was so angry. My older aunts were alive during that time, and one of the things that people don't tell you about was the racism and prejudice against the Japanese as a country, because you couldn't think of a Japanese person as just like us and then kill them, right? So the government also encouraged us to be encouraged the people in the United States to be racist against people of Japanese origin. And I'm sure that overlapped into all kinds of different people who looked like that. You know what I mean? Yeah, right. So I've seen cartoons and greeting cards and things like that in my aunt's, things that are just awful. But so Peggy had that going, and then they are the ones who killed her parents. And so the hatred that she felt, she prayed. There's this awful juxtaposition when you hate someone, where you want to submit to God and your feelings don't submit. And so something has to happen. So God has to help us in that to see truth. And what he showed Peggy Covell was that her parents were praying before they were killed. And he gave her this question: what were they praying for? What were they praying for? So were they praying that their daughter would grow up with hate for the Japanese and revenge herself somehow? No, that wouldn't have been. She was convinced, completely convinced, that souls of people who were about to murder them. She knew her parents. She knew that's what they were praying for, and that healed her. In order to show her repentance, since she was fluent in Japanese, she volunteered to work at a POW camp and be a social worker for the people there. So the men would come to her and say, why are you being so kind to us? Why are you helping us? Why are you doing these things? And she would say, because the Japanese killed my father and mother, but God, God has redeemed that, and I want you to know about him. She had this platform for the gospel like no other, and she, by God's grace, was able to use it because of the forgiveness in her life. Peggy Covell there's no book written about her. There's no movie of her life. She is at 2 lines in here in this little tiny book. And so the researcher that had to go other places to find research for that, nobody's told her story. I wish somebody would. I know I couldn't trace her after this and what her life was like. I know that she married, and I think she moved to Hawaii. But anyway, so Mitsuo Fuchida, after the war was over, after he flew that attack that was very, from the Japanese point of view, very successful against the United States, he kept climbing the ranks in the Japanese army. He had power and authority, and he was totally sold the government as God philosophy, the honor and shame culture that they had, that if you were shamed, you were worthless, that, it was, you just had to live this life of honor or die. And so then that whole culture, another one of those things you'd never think about. After the war was over, what was it like to live in an honor and shame culture with all these people? You were looking at them, and they had also been shamed by losing the war. It was devastating to him. And so he needed to know how to, forgiveness became a huge draw to him. He wanted to know how to forgive the people that were trying to restore his country. He was still very involved in government, needed to work with them, how to forgive them, how to keep going, how to move on. And somebody told him about Peggy Covell. Someone told him the story of how the Japanese had killed her father, but Jesus triumphed over it. And it caused him to want to get a Bible. And he read that Bible. He also met a man named DeShazar. I'm sorry, I can't remember his first name, but I think it's Jacob DeShazar, who handed him a tract. And anyway, Mitsuo Fuchida became an evangelist, and he preached all over Japan. At this time when Japan was emotionally bleeding and sad, he was able to bring the gospel to those hurting people and triumph, the triumph of forgiveness and grace. And really, Peggy Covell played this huge role in it, and she's just a footnote in history. Can you imagine how many footnotes there are in history? How many stories we're going to hear eventually? And again, just a smaller thing, she didn't spend her life in a prison camp. She just worked there for a few years, but the Lord richly used it to serve the people that her parents wanted to serve.
Wow. So much, so many. Faithfulness, this faithful service to the Lord, and we have no idea how he will use it. And they never met, right?
No, they've never met.
Story.
Oh, I'm not sure about it. It's possible they did, but I don't know it if they did.
Okay. Yeah, just that your faithfulness can be told by someone else to, just amazing. God is so good.
And the way that her parents' purpose was carried out in a way that we would never have imagined. If they hadn't died, she wouldn't be at the prison camp. If she hadn't been at the prison camp, then the prisoners wouldn't have talked to Mitsuo Fuchida. If that happened, then Mitsuo Fuchida would not have been able to preach the gospel to thousands and thousands of people in Japan until the end of his life. So God is so good.
Yes. What's that quote from Piper? He said, God is doing 1,000 different things at the same time that we do not see and cannot know, or something like that. And it's just that sovereign providential work of God that we can't know or understand. It's just amazing. I don't know if we have a bad connection, but you're frozen. Can you hear me?